Here we are back again, just a couple of minutes late. It's 9:36, and it is the 15th of May in the year 2023. Okay, we'll go straight to what we're anticipating for you this hour, this half hour. That is a chat between our two barristers, Philip and Richard, and some of it is funny, some of it is serious, and some of it is in between. So here they are, the dreadful duo. Well, good morning, gentlemen. The court, as they say, is all yours.
Thank you. We're in session. Good morning, darling Philip.
Good morning, sweetheart. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. You know, it's the only way that we get to see each other nowadays is through Keith being some facilitator of
matchmaker, chaperone.
That's exactly. I'm not sure I want it as chaperone as well. You know, we are Romeo and Juliet. We are Pyramus and Thisbe, you and me. There's no doubt about it. And I was considering that, and I thought, well, that's probably right, because certainly my family think that you're my boyfriend because I talk to you every day.
Yes.
But
it's an entirely platonic relationship, Richard.
It is exactly that. I don't think I've ever knowingly touched you.
No, you never have, thankfully. And
No.
with your height, that would be a worry.
That would be, you know, yeah, because I'm a tiny fella. I'm 4'3", yeah. But I did think that it's a bit like the school disco, where I always end up with the fat ginger one.
Shall we get on with the program, RB?
If you want to. Philip, today, it's lovely to have these chats, informal chats about things, principally about matters legal. Today, I'd like for us to be able to talk about Lewes Crown Court.
Yes.
But by which I mean the building in Lewes.
Yes.
Because this broadcast is watched by a man and his dog from Lewes. And the dog's in the room with me here, in fact, as I speak. Just looking at it, Lewes Combined Court Centre, and I think I may have said this before, so it's never stopped me in the past. There's Lewes with 4 courts in it. There's 2 courts in what is mainly the Magistrates' Court in Brighton. There are 4
Correct.
courts in Hove. And
Correct.
in fact, there are 2 courts which have been incorporated into the system within Chichester. But I'd like
That's
to talk
right.
about, I'd like to talk about the one in Lewes, please. And I just want to start by asking you this: do you know any court, I suppose with the possible exception of the Central Criminal Court, what's called the Old Bailey, do you know of any criminal court that has more impressive courtrooms than Lewes?
I personally don't. The nearest I can think of, but it doesn't get anywhere too near, is Aylesbury, or the old Aylesbury Court. But that's many years ago since I've been there.
No, you're talking about the old Aylesbury Court, exactly. Yes, it's
I think I must be.
Yes.
So no, currently I can think of nowhere, certainly that I've visited. It is a magnificent building, even now.
Yes. And of the
it was built in the early 19th century.
Well,
it began in 1808, finished in 1812.
The reason I wanted to talk
the frontage we see today is very, very similar to what it would have been then. The top three windows, as we now know them, above the Doric columns at the entrance, were in fact reliefs when it first opened, representing the good qualities of man. It was built in the classical style, designed by an architect called John Johnson, and it was made of Portland stone. Later on in the 19th century, it was extended to be the size we see it today. It was always known actually as County Hall, because up until 1938, it was run not just as a court or courts, but also with what we would call local politics. Hence its original name, County Hall. In 1938, what was then the County Council for Sussex moved out, and they went to what's now the Pelham Hotel. They moved again to what's now their current venue, but so they went to the Pelham, and it was only then that what you and I know as Lewis Crown Court, main building, it became purely an assize court. So it was purely to administer justice on the most serious matters. So it was an assize court. There were two courts only, the ones we see today, courts 1 and 2, who in their refurbished state are pretty much as they were. In those days, there were 3 assize courts, and bizarrely, I found this quite curious, bizarrely, Lewis was the least used, mainly because the transport in the county was appalling, as were the roads. Horsham Assize Court was the main one, and the other one that was very popular was East Grinstead. Anyway, the Courts Act of 1971 created what we know as the Crown Court. It did away with the old assizes and the quarter sessions, which were even rarer, hence the quarter sessions, where High Court judges would visit, stay in lodgings, do the most serious felonies. Now, there are four, as you've said, criminal courts, but there is a 5th court in the building, which is for family and civil matters, hence it being known as a combined court centre.
Phil, I'm just going to pause you there because I see that Keith went off to get himself a coffee, and I nodded off for about 10 minutes there, and I'm glad that you covered for me. That's very kind of you.
I did warn you. You asked me to do some research, Richard, and there's more to come.
Oh, good grief. Seriously. I've heard your closing speeches, Phil. Seriously.
Well, you call them mesmerizing. Others have called them deeply soporific.
I've certainly had the experience of people nodding off. in closing speeches, and it's a terrible thing, isn't it? Where you get a juror who falls asleep. I may have told you
there's that wonderful anecdote about the jury in session dealing with some horrible sex case, and the complainant in the witness box was simply unable to say the words of what her attacker had said to her, something really, really awful.
Yeah.
What he wanted to do with her, or what he was going to do to her. So the judge asked her to write it down, and it was then passed along the jury to read. But one juror had fallen asleep, and he was in between two women who were not asleep. So the woman passed the note to this asleep male juror and woke him up. And he took one look at this, having woken up, and beamed at her because he thought that was her propositioning him. That is a true story.
Yes, I know it is. Yeah. There's a story about somebody who was a local barrister here and in Lewes, sat in Lewes, and then became a judge, now retired. And as a barrister, he had one juror when he was dealing with a case, and this juror was writing everything down, every point, every little thing. And he thought, I've got that juror's on my side. That's my juror. And then
How wrong that can be.
Well, it can be wrong, but he then got to his closing speech. And this juror was just sitting there sort of like that, apparently completely asleep. And so the barrister said, sorry, Your Honour, can I just have a comfort break? Thinking that it would wake the juror up and everything would be okay. So jury go out of the court, everyone goes out of the court. Come back in, there's a note from that juror who says that if Mr. X, the barrister, thinks I'm not listening, then he's wrong. And that happened.
You mentioning the term comfort break.
Yes.
A now recently retired judge from Lewes, who sat in Lewes Court regularly, Judge Anthony, and he won't mind me mentioning this.
Right.
He hated the use of that phrase. He actually would say to you, and he said to me, I learned not to say it. He said, Mr. Meredith, don't talk in riddles. If you want the toilet, just ask to go to the toilet.
Or there's always the water jug, isn't there?
Yes.
You can. Anyway,
incidentally, Richard and Philip, me fetching the coffee was not because I was falling asleep on board, but I do have Parkinson's and it dries out my mouth, so I need to refresh it.
No. Of course, I was only, as I say,
Keith, this is your show in every sense, but you are not immune from Barton's so-called sense of humour, I'm afraid. Now, Richard, you mentioned the other court venues that fall under the Lewes umbrella.
Yes.
That means that there are 10 courts.
12, I think.
Which means that Lewes is considered administratively a very, very serious animal. Hence, we have a resident judge who becomes a deputy lieutenant, the current one being Judge Lang of King's Counsel. And that's how it's run. That no judge has a courtroom that is his or her own. And judges, again, who have retired, would often complain off the record to me about that. They were sick of being moved around constantly. I mean, like at the Old Bailey or lesser courts, they all have their own courtrooms. You know who's going to be in there. But not in Lewes. And that.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please, you carry on.
No. I mean, because some court centres, even with 10 courts, whatever it might be, they're all based in the same place. The difficulty with Sussex is that, and I know this because I practice in the courts in Sussex, I can either be in Lewes or I can be in Chichester, which is quite a difference in terms of
Well, certainly for you. And when I was practicing, the reverse was true of me. Lewes became the particularly with my increasing disability and lack of mobility, Lewes became the furthest I felt able to go. But anyway, the old building has seen some very notable cases. I mean, even its run-of-the-mill stuff can be pretty serious. Both you and I have done, on both sides of the fence, some very serious matters that wouldn't necessarily get into a law book. But the acid bath murderer, John Haig, was convicted at Lewes.
Court one, Lewes. Yeah.
Dr. Bodkin Adams.
Oddly enough, Phil,
also,
sorry, at some stage I would quite like to talk about John Bodkin Adams because it's a fascinating case, the Harold Shipman.
Yeah, well, what you should do is you should do for the viewer, and I use the term singularly quite deliberately, but the viewer,
thank you,
and no doubt his dog, you could do on Bodkin Adams what you did on the Piltdown fraud.
Yes, or you could talk about it as well. But he was the Harold Shipman, allegedly, of his time. But I've got a couple of odd little bits of extra information about him. That, but he,
well, it may interest you both that a great friend of my family, particularly of my mum, years ago, Roy Green, married to one of my mum's best friends, his GP was Harold Shipman. And until the day he passed away, he refused to believe point blank that Shipman was guilty. Refused completely. Wouldn't hear of it.
So that's post-conviction. He still didn't believe
That's
it.
post-conviction. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and of course there was Sean Jenkins.
Billy Joe Jenkins murder.
Correct, the stepfather.
Yeah.
That dreadful man, Roy Whiting.
Yes.
Eventually got his comeuppance at Lewes.
Murdered Sarah Payne.
A case that I think you were involved in was Coots.
Yes, I was involved in Coots.
The murder of a teacher.
Graham Coots killed his partner's best friend because he was a necrophiliac and he wanted to keep the body. And it may well be at some stage, Keith, that within reason, we can talk about that as well.
Well, the thing about Coots, beyond its grisly facts, is it still is it not, a paramount authority on how to draft an indictment?
It's exactly
the Crown Court charge sheet and the use of alternative charges in black and white rather than implicit.
Yes, and it raises interesting questions for debate. But you're absolutely right, because he was tried in Lewes, and I was the junior for the prosecution in that, and then it went all the way up to the House of Lords, and they ordered a retrial, and I was the junior in that, and that occurred at the Old Bailey. And in fact, Bodkin Adams was originally tried at the Old Bailey, where he got acquitted, but then got convicted here in Lewes. So,
if I'm not mistaken, Bodkin Adams was turned over, if you like, by the widow of a school teacher at St. Bede's. St. Bede's, of course, being the home of one of the great swindlers, Horatio Bottomley.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Yes.
Now that is the most interesting piece of information this program has contained, and it has not involved either me or you, Richard.
No, I know. I'm
You
afraid.
see, Keith is clearly a natural.
Of course, but I'm not sure a natural what. We'll just leave it there for our one viewer and his dog to decide what.
I mean, he may have a dry mouth, but when he uses it, it's to very good effect.
Listen, we're not careful, we're going to get the BAFTA award for comedy with this lot.
But I first became aware of the impact of Coots, not because of the trial, but of a case I was involved in. You may recollect that there were these huge animal rights protests at the Shoreham docks.
Was that about animal rights for huge animals? Is that what you mean, or?
No, animal rights to do with sheep in the main, the transportation of sheep. And a number of protesters were tried in Court 3 at Lewes by the then resident judge, Richard Brown. It was prosecuted in part by our old colleague, Richard Cherrell, now retired. I had a very, very minor chap, real tail end, and pleaded guilty. But Coots reared its head very early on in that case because the indictment had to be re-amended a number of times to suit Coots. And another notable case was the tragic death of a number of firefighters at a local fireworks factory run by brothers called the Winters Brothers and their company. And they were all convicted of culpable homicide or manslaughter of those poor firefighters. Now I mentioned Court 3.
No, sorry. Two things. Firstly, you talked about animal rights protesters. Maybe at some stage I could talk about how I represented the Brightling Sea animal rights protesters when I was really quite junior, but it was the first time I was in the national press. Because it was.
Now you are showing off, aren't you?
I am showing off, Phil. If I can't show off to you, who can I show off to?
Thankfully, your volume is rather muted, so hopefully nobody can really hear you.
Well, you're very loud, Phil, so that's good. And
of course,
yeah.
It's coming through loud and clear here.
Yeah. So sorry, Phil. You're about to tell us more about Lewes Crown Court.
No. Just as we discussed pre-program, there are now 4 Crown Courts. So the upstairs area, which had undoubtedly once been used for the local politics, that became, I believe that was some sort of council chamber. That became what is now Court 3.
Yes.
At the far end of the lower corridor is what you and I know as Court 4, aka the broom cupboard.
It's a tiny court. It's a tiny,
smaller, worse laid out court for a Crown Court I have never come across anywhere else.
Because
and during lockdown it was farcical, absolutely farcical. Anyway, that used to be the magistrates' court.
Phil, you've spoken enough, mate. Court 4, and you'll confirm this, I'm sure, just by nodding your head. Don't talk. If you're defending in a case, you have the right to sit closer to the jury. So the prosecution are on one side of the court and you get to sit nearer the jury. Is that correct? There's a slight nod there. I could see the sun glinting off his head there.
Always been a nodding dog, you know that.
Very much so, very much so. Court 4 is so small that if you're defending in there, you feel as if you're sitting on one of the jurors' laps, talking to them. It's hopeless.
Well, the last case I did in that court, where a very, very honest and very innocent, thank God, young man had been accused by an ex-girlfriend of indecency. I kid you not, one of the jurors, a female, was continuously looking over the front of the jury box at my notes.
Phil, what I find difficult to accept about your story there is the thought that you ever make notes.
Well, I started writing spoof things to amuse her. I didn't bother with the evidence. I just wrote sort of funny remarks. I thought that propositioning her would go too far, but
it's never stopped you, Phil. Let's be fair.
I've never stopped trying. My success rate is far behind yours.
You have a 0 success rate in that regard. Anyway, coming back to Lewes Crown Court, there's a lovely cafe there, isn't there, within the building?
Yes, if one goes through the front entrance, which is a rather cramped affair because the security is rather tight. The senior man is a lovely guy called Tyler, who runs a very tight ship and with his cronies. So once you've survived that gauntlet, run that gauntlet, you can then turn right and go down beyond Court 2, and you have the toilets and the cafe.
And just in terms of this, because the one man, not his dog, I'm afraid, on this occasion, because dogs aren't allowed into the courts. If they wanted to go there, you can confirm, they're open to anybody at any time, aren't they?
Yes, well, not only that, and certainly pre-lockdown they did, because you were very involved in this. They do open days, whereby the public can really see everything, not just the dock and the court. They can go downstairs and see the cells. I mean, perhaps we're running out of time now, but perhaps another time we could talk about that and move on to the prison and things like that. But the cells are a fascination in themselves. The old death cell will send shivers down your spine, frankly.
Yes. I recall because it's on the Saturday in Lewes where we have our buildings open day. So lots of buildings become available to people. Not my house, I should say, even though I live very near the prison. My house isn't open to you.
Well, who would want to see your house?
Good point. Well made.
It's like Manoir Fantôme at Disneyland.
You're very kind. But I did one of these Saturday things. So it's an open day, and they decided that we'd have a little tiny mock trial, which I prosecuted, and a member of our chambers, Sarah Tate, defended. And I lost to her, of course I did. I've never lost to her in real court. And
yeah, I knew you'd have to give that caveat. You are such
no. She's the one. She's the one who's got the grievance about it. I promise you. But
you are such an egotist, really.
We had a trial, a little mock trial where the defendant, who I obviously cross-examined, was in fact the son of the judge, a judge that you know very well because of your, I'm not going to name him, but your common interest in a football team.
Yeah.
And I was cross-examining, and the judge intervened because he's got his son in the witness box that I'm cross-examining, and he's clearly trying to protect his son. He's an adult, for heaven's sake. And he said that's not a proper question. And we had this quite, not exactly heated, but we had a debate, put it that way.
Well, that particular judge, who I'm very fond of, does intervene in real life.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's very much of his nature. And I ended up asking the question anyway. And I said, look, no, sorry, I'm just going to get on and ask this question. And we had a courtroom full of members of the public because they were there for the open day. And afterwards, people came up to me and said, that was brilliantly scripted, the way you did that. And I said, that wasn't scripted. That's real life.
Yeah. Yes.
That just
I remember doing a similar one at Chichester years ago with Irena Ray Crosby, our ex-colleague, defending, and that just wasn't scripted.
No. Of course, you can't.
How am I doing the time, Mr. Keith?
You're just hitting 30 minutes now, so it's almost time to say toodle pip.
Okay, lovely. We've got
well, toodle pip it is.
Yes, Keith, with your approval, and you can tell me off air if we don't have it, I'd like to carry on talking to Phil next week, if possible.
Listen, we expect you to be at least a weekly feature. So the two of you had better keep your diaries at hand. Once a week and possibly twice when you're feeling in full flow.
I've heard women say that to me, but not for a while, I admit.
Well, we'll have to hear about those experiences too, I think, Richard.
Not in my company, Mr. Keith.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Own slots, if you'll forgive the phrase for that.
Half hour. And we will see you next week. Look forward to it. Toodle pip, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Now, it's always a great pleasure when some of my long-time friends, but also very interesting people, drop by. And out of the blue, here he is, John Henty.
Hello!
And a legend in his own time, but also boosts very much the heritage of Brighton district, because you were on BBC Radio for a long time.
Open Radio Brighton in 1968, and it's all changed since then, I'm afraid to say.
I'm afraid to say so too.
Absolutely.
But during that time, you met many legends, and you actually, I mean, you have this wonderful knack of maintaining them in front of people and doing it in a very unique way, because you did Raymond Briggs with a one-man show.
Yes, we did, absolutely. Approached him, and he was very reticent, shall we say, but we persuaded him that it was a good idea. But he said, and I've never forgotten this, in a little note, he said, "Go ahead, but don't involve me," which I thought was wonderful. Yeah. And we did, and we raised a lot of money on a couple of occasions for charity.
Can I tell you a little story about the snowman?
Yes.
Because, as you know, I worked in Kosovo for 2.5 years, and I used to take my staff little things back, and particularly to help them with their English. And I took a copy of the snowman back to a lovely young lady who was my media law advisor. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, Keith, this is really going to help with my English."
right.
No text.
How true. How true. How true. How true. Remarkable man and local to Lewis.
Now, there is another legend that you want to talk about because, in fact, you're organising something. In fact, if I may say so, you've been rather successful in getting his name in front of everybody again over the last 10 days or so, because I've seen a lot of references to
The
him.
cheeky chappie.
Yeah, right.
The cheeky chappie.
Off
yes.
you go. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm giving a little talk on Monday today in Brighton, in Patcham, which is north of Brighton. It's my 199th talk in Sussex, I'm proud to say. And the subject is a man very close to my heart, and I suspect to yours, Keith, and a very large number of other people, not necessarily elderly people, but a range of people who admire stand-up comedy, and particularly British stand-up comedy. The man is Max Miller. And Max Miller died 60 years ago this month, funnily enough, in Brighton. He was born in Brighton, he lived in Brighton, and he died in Brighton. He appeared more times at the Brighton Hippodrome than any other performer. He did 3 Royal Command shows. He was at the London Palladium during the London Blitz in 1940 with Dame Vera Lynn, and he appeared in Lewis the same year in 1940 at the Odeon Cinema in front of the cinema screen with one pianist and an audience of guys, many of whom had come back from Dunkirk.
Okay. Well, now, in talking about the past, while we were just chatting before we came on the air, you pointed out that he had a remarkable effect on the present and future of comedy.
Totally right. Above all else, he was described as the best front cloth comic ever. In other words, he had no gimmicks other than what he wore, of course. You've got to hit him when you come on stage. It's a bit, he wore a hat for a start, you know, Keith, and you know how important a hat is. Absolutely, a cheeky hat, rather like yours. I don't have my
head, yes.
Exactly. I don't have one at the moment. I wear one occasionally. It's normally a cap.
Yes, you do. Actually, I'm surprised to see you without it.
That's right. But I mean, that was the whole point about him. He came on there and he then simply did front cloth, simply one-liners, bit like Ken Dodd. In other words, people like Jimmy Cricket, Paul Merton, Eddie Izzard, they're all basically stand-up, and they all owe it to Max. And what we're trying to do locally in Sussex and in Brighton specifically is to pay tribute to him permanently somewhere, but not only to him, because a lot of younger people may not relate to him, but to the whole range of British comedians, Ken Dodd, you name them all, celebrating British comedy, British stand-up in a celebration in Brighton of all places. And basically, it ought to be in the museum.
Right. Am I wrong in thinking that there is a statue to Max Miller?
Yes, there is. There is a society, and I'm wearing the badge, funnily enough. I don't know, you probably can't see it, but that's our little badge. That's the Max Miller Appreciation Society, formed over 20 years ago in Brighton by a man with strong associations with Lewis, a fellow called Jack Strutt, and another man called Mick Toner. The society's been going ever since. We have regular meetings. We have an annual dinner. We raise money for charity in the summer, and we've raised over £30,000 already. Really good. And absolutely right. He was relevant to Brighton, and that's why we've got the society. And yes, the statue. We said there's got to be a statue.
Right.
The trouble with the statue, Keith, and you'll appreciate this, it's all very well, but it's bronze. It's got no life in it.
Yeah.
Miller had flesh, blood, and he was cheeky. So in a way, we need more than just a statue, and that's what this is all about.
That's great. Now, just remind us what's happening in Patcham.
Well, there are regular meetings, Towns Women's Guilds, of course, WIs. This one is the University of the Third Age, U3A, a whole group of people. I thought it was meant to be an educational sort of get up. And in point of fact, this afternoon, it will be very educational because they'll learn a thing or two about Max Miller. I mean, I'll be telling one or two of his jokes. One he used to say, now, I like the girls who do. I like the girls who don't. I hate the girl who says she will and then she says she won't. But the girl I like the best of all, and I think you'll say I'm right, is the girl who says she never does, but she looks as though she, here. Now, you see, that is quintessentially Max Miller, because if he'd have said she looks as though she might, it's ruined the joke. Timing. How crucial is timing. And giving talks is something I enjoy. Do you know a friend of mine, a little story? I mustn't stay too long.
No,
It's lovely.
carry on.
It's a little story.
It's always good to have you drop by. I've been trying to get you in for quite some time.
I know I'm a busy man, demands everywhere.
Very important man, yes.
Oh, don't listen. No, a friend of mine, actually, he used to give a talk rather similar to mine. And his subject was enjoying sex at 60. Now, his wife, I mean, obviously, he wasn't going to admit that to her. She thought that he was giving a talk on the pleasures of yachting, you see, which was fine, and he got away with it. But one day she met a friend in Lewes High Street, and the friend said, you know, your husband's talk. She said, they are quite remarkable. I mean, what he doesn't know about the subject, I mean, it is amazing. And the wife said, well, you know, that really surprises me, because the first time he tried it, he was violently sick. And the second time, his hat blew off. I say, now listen, hey, that's enough of that. So anyway, it's in Patcham. It's the old, very old Memorial Hall in Patcham. It's at 2:00, and I'm sure if any of your lovely viewers came along there, we could have a really, really good time. It'll only take about an hour. I've got some recordings. I've also got the recording from Max here in Lewes at the Odeon Theatre in 1940. I'm going to be playing some of that as well. Come along and join us.
Now, John, you're a very vital character. I mean, the two of us are now nudging 35, so getting around is getting a little more difficult than it was.
It is.
But you are quite famous in many ways of boosting the heritage of Brighton, not just Max Miller, but a lot of things. And there are several things that over the years you sort of said to me a little bit here, a little bit there. What other things other than Max Miller are you actually have you got your fingers in at the moment? Let's put it that way.
Well, I'd say above all else, I've always been, you know, a great supporter of the Palace Pier, for example.
You had a pianola on the Palace Pier.
Yeah,
you did. Yes,
what a memory. That was one summer my wife never ever forgave me. Actually, I owned a pianola, a player piano, and I said, I tell you what, there's not much music in those days on the pier, so why don't we get a pianola? It wasn't ours. But I knew a woman, as it's so important to know people, and a lady called Mary Belton lived and worked and had a shop in Brighton, and it dealt simply in player pianos, wonderful things. So I said to Mary, this will be good publicity for you. Let's go in the little restaurant there, which was a bit run down and tatty in those days. And I said, we'll sit there and we'll play people's tunes on the old pianola, stuff like Scott Joplin and stuff like that. And then people will pay to have a tune played. Only trouble was, Keith, it won't surprise you to know people didn't pay. They didn't want to pay. Oh, no, we've only come in for a cup of tea, actually. And mate, we'll have a scone. Should we have a scone? Oh, that's a good idea. Let's have a scone. Well, would you like to hear a piece of music by Scott Joplin? Oh, no, thank you, dear. No. We quite like that Winifred Atwell, but not Scott Joplin. No. So we were there for a whole year on the Palace Pier, and I loved it. And another year we were on Hastings Pier. Now, that's another story, because my other interest, apart from Max Miller, is Donald McGill, the postcard artist, the rude postcards.
Oh, right.
I've got masses of his rude cards, and they're not rude. That's the other thing, like Max Miller. He was never cheeky. I'll tell you what, the comedy I see today on the Apollo and other shows elsewhere, and some of the names who are supposed to be top British comedy. Last night there was some award system for television. The BAFTAs, was it possibly?
Something like that.
I was going to nominate you, Keith, but I never got around to it. But anyway, that was fronted by a bloke called Rob, wearing glasses similar to mine, and another fella from Crawley called Ramesh Rang. I don't quite know his name, but and they claimed that they were top British comedians. Forget it. Not the sort of comedy you and I understand. Right. The world has changed.
Yes. I have to say, I said something to me this morning. I mean, I get up at 5 o'clock to check the front pages and so on and so forth.
Of course,
and sometimes, quite by accident, I see things, and I'll look at it and I'll let you know who. But there is a stand-up Irish comedian of the old school, and I found myself chuckling myself silly, and I thought, you don't get this sort of bloke anymore.
No.
You know, it's all sort of very esoteric and
Well,
so on
it
and so
is.
forth. But this guy is funny. He's really funny, and not only that, he's been totally non-you because he's taking the piss out of the Irish,
Yes.
And he is Irish.
Yes.
So and it's hilarious.
But
I'll
nobody's
send it on to you.
offended.
No, exactly.
We don't want to go down that road. It's far too dangerous.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
Max Miller would turn in his grave. 60 years ago, he died, remember? He'd turn in his grave with most of the stuff that is now coming out as comedy. It's not.
No.
It's sad.
Yes.
And
I
we've got to
agree with
put it right. I don't know how we're going to do it. I mean, I will be out there in Patchen this afternoon telling a few jokes, but it's not the same thing, you know. It's not the same.
I think you better sort of have a Max Miller 10 minutes each week on Mirador, don't you?
Now there's a funny thing. Now listen. Well, who knows? Anything can
It's
happen.
not a bad idea.
It's
Let's
a
pursue
good
that. Yeah.
idea, Keith.
And you're only around the corner.
Yeah.
So popping in.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It was lovely to
Let's,
see you.
let's keep Max Miller going.
Yes.
Max Miller on Mirador.
Yes, and then
M on M. Yes.
brilliant. Then chuck Spike Milligan in. I mean,
Absolutely.
I knew Spike very well.
And we could even do a little Raymond Briggs from time to time.
That's a good idea. Listen, Keith, I've got to go now because I've got to prepare for this talk and
Right.
obviously do my usual aerobics and stuff like that. He joked. So that's a brilliant idea, and I would willingly do that.
Okay.
It'd look nice to get some feedback too. If anybody does remember Max or Spike Milligan or anybody, let us know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the strange thing is that I never quite understand the figures as they come from Facebook and so on, which sometimes are quite astonishing. I mean, one day we actually got 2,000 hits for a tiny little place like this. But where I get the real feedback is into my own personal Facebook email account.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see who says, "Hey, I saw you with John."
Yes, that would be delightful. Well,
Yeah.
we would be really pleased,
Yeah.
you know, because it's a good idea. And you talk about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. As you know, I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do my program
Absolutely.
at 5:30 in Brighton, which was then axed by the BBC, by the way. I was being paid 15 quid a day to do the program. You know, well, there we are. It's history. We move on. You have to move on. Final word.
But the BBC have always lacked judgment, John.
Well, and they still do. They're
Yeah,
still worried about
absolutely.
the Ken Bruces of this world and the new Vernon Kay who's taking over, who doesn't stand a chance. It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Here's the final rub that I mentioned to you earlier, that I was invited onto television about a week ago. And as usual, I appeared for about 15 seconds, I would have said, after an hour-long interview, you know, the sort of thing. And what was even more amusing was the fact the only reason they wanted to talk to me, having met Stevie Wonder, having met Alfred Hitchcock, having met the Beatles, having flown with Istanbul with James Bond, for goodness sake, they wanted to interview me because I'd been sitting in the audience at the Eurovision Song Contest in Brighton when ABBA won. Oh, that must have been very interesting, Mr. Hunting. Well, it wasn't. Did you think that ABBA were going to be as big as they were? No, but I like the girls, and my goodness me, lovely. But never mind.
That reminds me, when I was a young man, that I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew the man who struck the gong for J. Arthur Rank.
I know. I know. How important is that? Exactly. Think of
Take a look. I knew.
Unbelievable. Anyway, lovely
John,
to see you.
Great success this afternoon.
Yes, absolutely.
But you've heard it here. You heard it from the source. He's going to come and talk to me, and we're going to have a Max Miller 10 minutes or so each week on Mirador.
It's a good idea. We'll see what we can organise. Keith,
Well done.
thank you very much.
Good to see you, John.
Off I go. Shall I go?
You can go.
Yeah. By the way, well done, Brighton and Hove Albion beating
3-0.
3-0, a wonderful win.
Actually, just while you're here, because I know that you're a great fan of the footy, Brighton are really starting to do very well again. Yeah.
I won't say who I normally support because I worked for the club and I work for the Albion, and I work for Wimbledon.
He can't say Crystal Palace.
I don't want to offend local viewers. However, the fact is that it was a magnificent performance by Brighton and Hove Albion. Credit to them. They've got everything right, from the management, directors, the ground. They've got everything right, and the manager is excellent. I full praise to them. I hope they get into Europe.
Oh, yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great.
I'm off.
Good to see you. Cheers, Keith.
Take care. Keep taking the tablet.
Okay, and go and see him this afternoon.
No. Regularly.
Well, there we are. Is that always a great pleasure to see John, and as you can tell, if there's anybody that's enthusiastic about this area, it's John Henty. John, and I hope that some of the things that he brings back from the past, I also said to him, in line with legends of Brighton, is the Jill Day, the singer, who's the sister of Liza Page, who appears regularly every Thursday here on Mirador, and she has got a little bit of a video of her sister, and she's going to bring that in, and we're going to play it so that people can remember who is very famous in her day, Jill Day, now sadly gone from this world. But if we can evoke a little bit of a memory here and a little bit of a memory there, and if you've got any memories, let us know. You can always tap in on YouTube to let us know you've got some thoughts and so on. Okay, it's now 10. It's 10:27, and that brings us within a half hour. So what we'll do is I did send an invitation to Suzanne Mouchot, but because of the holidays keep falling on a Monday, we haven't had Suzanne around for 2 or 3 weeks. But I assure you, she's waiting in the wings to come back, and we will look forward to seeing her. Well, we haven't been to the park recently. Let's go to the park. Well, it's now 10:29. We're into the last 30 minutes, and we may have people popping in, or we may not. But I'm probably going to spend that just chatting to you a little bit for a moment or two. We'll take a look at the inside of the newspapers, because sometimes that's where some of the interesting stories are, rather than the headline stuff. But just let me bring you up to date with Mirador. We're beginning to, and we're grateful that we're beginning to gather not substantial audiences. We're not into the millions yet, but we are into the thousands, and that's really great. And we're also starting to do really quite serious things. And this past week, we had interviews with an expert on witches. I mean, when I say an expert, I mean a real expert, not just somebody who thinks witches are interesting. We had the consumer editor of the Financial Times, we had well, we have the two lawyers, the barristers who keep us amused but also informed about what's going on locally in the courts. We have got coming up this coming week Wendy Joseph, who is the one of the very few lady judges to sit at the Old Bailey on serious crime cases. And we've got a couple of other people of note. And I think that if you want to find out some of the things which are not frippery, but still amusing and entertaining, we're the people to start to tap into. We're getting a nice team too. Ex-journalists, and when I say ex-journalists of note, not somebody who just was on the Colchester Gazette or whatever, but ex-ITN people, ex-BBC people, and we are building a nice little team to try and bring you the very best. It's taken a long time. We've worked very hard at it, and as John Henty said, you know, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure that I get here not only on time for 7:30 start, but also to find out what's going on at that hour of the morning, see what's interesting and what's not, and see who we can bring. We do find sometimes because of our lack of resources. For instance, yesterday was the Battle of Lewes, and it takes place in the streets and then down at the convent grounds. But one of the things that I find difficult is sometimes the people who organize these things don't make themselves readily available. When you go onto their websites, it says, "Oh, fill out this form and we'll get back to you." Well, I'm sorry, as journalists, we don't sort of work that way. And anyway, we don't really have the time. We need to talk to you direct. But I was very anxious to have somebody because the Battle of Lewes is one of my areas of interest. And in a documentary, The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town, the first episode is about the Battle of Lewes. And it's an interesting event, if you like, in English history and the start of English democracy. And so it's important in that sense. And yet, if you say the Battle of Lewes to many people, they haven't a clue what you're talking about. So it's those sort of things that we're trying to bring to your attention and let you know about. Also, we hope that because we are now beginning to motor a little bit and we can get one or two little bit extra resources, is that we'll be able to properly, instead of the half-assed way that we've done it in the past, is bring you the raft race, which comes up on, I think it's August the 20th. We like to try and cover a patina, which is all over in about 15 minutes, but nonetheless a very important milestone in the history and the career and the events of the school children in this town as they move up each year to a grade until they leave school. And they do a marvelous job in the art world, parading their efforts through the town. And that is on top of some of the events towards the end of the year. One is the late night shopping, of course, and of course bonfire. And what we did this last year ourselves is we had a carol party in the White Hart, and a magic night it was. And we also had a little party to celebrate the coronation, and a magic day that was. We tried to bring together a little bit of activity along with a couple of drinks and something to nibble. And also we get very nice music. And what is the sad thing is is here we, and you can hear John Henty and others who are as enthusiastic as I'll get out to try and bring puff life back into this town. We're not denigrating those people who organise various things, but they're very, very local, and they don't see the light of day. We're very happy to help people publicise those things. Not so much to get people there, but the mere fact that we are trying to show that Lewis is not dead. And yet people who come back here are now saying it's creaking at the seams. They're very unhappy with what they see when they get back here. I'm not a bit surprised, because whoever the idiot was who decided to send the administration down to Eastbourne did not do this town any service whatsoever. And the executive, in other words, the civil service who administer this town, are not doing us any good by sitting down there and doing it there. And the local councils who permitted this to happen and continue to allow it to happen is a fire on them. And no wonder I, along with an awful lot of other people, don't have any faith left in the politicians. It's time that you showed us. Instead of pouncing around with your let's do Liberals, let's do Greens, instead of pouncing around like that, why not show what you're doing, because you're in a position of privilege, what you're doing to put life back into Lewis. That's a good phrase, isn't it? Life back into Lewis, instead of seeing the creaking high street and the bits and pieces that go on and barely get recognition. Let's see you do something that shows not only the world, but us here in Lewis, that we've still got spirit. We've still got joie de vivre. We're trying to do our bit, and we get ignored by those people who then send out stuff about how many houses they built and so on. It's all powder puff. They haven't done it at all. What they do is they latch onto any building and say that it's they are responsible. Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. But they could start to breathe life into this town. There is no reason why Lewis couldn't become famous. I personally have a vision, and nobody will even talk to me about it. But one of the very famous media events each year is the Sundance Academy. It's run by Robert Redford, and it's named after Sundance is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I see no reason why this couldn't actually each year have a festival, a media festival, that would bring together all media and really set this town alight, and not only that, but then let the rest of the world know that we are here doing things. Can I get anybody interested? Not a bit of it. They all want to fart around talking about how they failed to put in electricity plugs for new electric cars. You know, I'm sorry, but politics is failed politics. I'm not saying the ideas are bad, but they can never seem to actually bring it to fruition. It's talk, talk, talk. And that's not good enough. We want action, action, action. And what goes on in the local councils that we don't ever see is frightening. It really is. So I very much want to push for politicians who will do the job that we elect them for, not by saluting their party headquarters and sticking to their party philosophy. There is no party philosophy. It's one simple thing: is let us make Lewis exciting again. Not let's make Lewis great. Lewis probably never going to be great in that sense, but it can be exciting. I went to catch the bus yesterday, and I found that the bus stop down by the prison had been suspended for the Battle of Lewis. So I had to walk into town. And I walked into town, and God bless them, they try their hardest to do a good day. but I was some 10 or 15 minutes after the road closure for the Battle of Lewes. And by the time I got into town, 10 or 15 minutes later, there was no evidence of the battle having raged through the streets. Surely, I'm not blaming the organizers. They need support. But that's exactly the sort of thing where they don't get the sort of support to make that day great. And it's such an important occasion. We can make it great. And I think that if a few organizations would get together and not form committees so that it becomes a talking shop, but really made hay. As a matter of fact, I must talk to Richard Barton again, because some years ago we had the idea to try Tom Paine in the courthouse here. Tom Paine was charged with it wasn't treason, but it was the next thing up. And if he had been found guilty, he would have been hanged, drawn, and quartered. Very nasty way to die. And he eventually was persuaded to nip back to the United States because he was going to lose. But there is, and his trial, which the defense was prepared, is considered to be the first ever defense that was freedom of the press. My God, it all happens in Lewes. It all happens. And what do the local politicians do in terms of capitalizing on it? Nothing. Nothing. And they don't even give us a few bob to try and do something with it. I'm flabbergasted. No, I'm not. That's what politicians are all about. So perhaps it's better that we keep the politicos out of it. Let them fritter around, playing silly nonsense, silly buggers. Oh dear, it's 11:15. I'm in full flow this morning, and that's the sort of thing that we think should take place. And it's good to hear that John Henty is continuing, and we're all long in the tooth, but we found the energy to do it. You can't get young people to get involved. Not really. I'm being an injustice because I'm generalizing. Of course, there are young people involved in all sorts of things, but there's no great coordinated effort to make people outside Lewes say, aha, what happens there is phenomenal. It does for Bonfire, but once again, that's something that happens once a year. That's not quite true because the Bonfire season sees several bonfire meetings, and it is a season, if you like. It does go over a period of weeks. But if only we could coordinate some of these things and then get something as a focal point going. And my idea of media is, can you imagine if we had a media convention here? With our media, they would all write about us. They would all set a new vitality about Lewes. Set it going. I'm just funny old Hayes, you know. He has great ideas. They're not unrealizable. Yes, they are. It's just that people will not get off their fat backsides and do something about it. They prefer a talking shop about whether, in fact, we got the local loose sorted. So, there we are. That's what we're faced. That's what we're trying to achieve. And luckily, there are people who want and think like, if only we can start to spark something, how wonderful. Anyway, there was the Battle of Lewes yesterday. There are all sorts of other things that we can celebrate. We should be celebrating Tom Paine, who's actually starting to get increased importance in both the United States, where he achieved much of his stuff, and in Lewes, where he achieved a lot more. What we don't know about Tom Paine is astonishing. People don't know that he was an inventor. People don't know that he was a soldier. What they do know is they go to a pub called the Rights of Man. Anyway, hopefully coming back onto the team in a limited way is Paul Miles. And Paul is a Louisian who, born and bred, who achieved some marvelous things. He was involved in bringing Rodin's Kiss back to Lewes for 2000. He was involved in the Magic Garden, which unfortunately was badly damaged when the wall to the castle fell down. But he's a mover and a shaker, and I'm talking to him next week about coming on as a team member of Mirador. We're getting some interesting people, and if we can't, between us, start to stir real ambition, a real excitement, then there's something wrong with us. Don't say it. But those are the sort of things that are happening on Mirador television. We work hard in the background. We haven't had any resources at all. No cash. Nobody's prepared to put any money into something that is a bit ephemeral the way that we are. But there are some wonderful people that work in the background and the forefront to try and make this a viable local television service. Local, not parochial. We don't deal in lost cats. But we do try to reflect to the rest of the world what happens in Lewes. And that's been very difficult. And it's because of our leadership. So let's ask them, let's tell them, let's demand, get the finger out and give us back our town. Bring Lewes back to Lewes and not let it sit in Eastbourne, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. So as our jolly little band is beginning to increase with a whole host of interesting stuff, and I hope that you'll be part of that interesting revolution and join us. All right, enough about Mirador. As I just wanted to take a quick look through the inside of the papers. It's the start of a week. What are they talking about on the inside pages? Well, of course, there is some bits and pieces about the BAFTA award. There's about Schofield having his fight with Holly Willoughby. Who the hell? Look at this. You can serve red wine with fish. As food pairing is just a whimsy. Pairing white wine with fish has been a golden rule going back decades for anyone hosting a dinner party, right? And of course, to really impress, oysters must be served with champagne. Oh, yes. But marrying up food and drink is largely a marketing ploy, according to psychologists and an expert on the sensory qualities of food. Professor Charles Spence says it is just as suitable to serve pilchards with a glass of bubbly as oysters, as they share the same amino acid which boosts their savory flavor when paired with champagne. And he added that several red wines are perfectly fine to drink with fish if their iron content is reasonably low. In a paper on food pairings in the journal Nature Food, Professor Spence writes, on occasion, specific food and drink products are paired for no other reason than whimsy of the person who happens to be recommending the match. He added that pairing was just storytelling about food, as the chemicals in certain items do not always dictate flavor. Well, I've actually known for quite some time that there are some reds that actually go quite good at being chilled. Now, I'm no wine expert, so I'm not setting myself up as one. But it's not an unknown fact that some white wines do go with red meat. Some red wines do go with white fish. And as for bubbly, love it. Now, I like the flavour of oysters and champagne. Oysters and champagne are one of my favourites. That's not because of any marketing ploy, that's just my taste. But my taste does not dictate what other people say is a must. You should only, darling, drink champagne with oysters. Take your oysters back. I was going to be rude, but I shouldn't. Let's just turn over a page or two. We've got 1 or 2 minutes left. There is fear about what Harmer is doing, and move over Loreen. The absolute star of this show was Hannah. What show is that? Oh, that's a Eurovision Song Contest. The British entry came second. Wow. Oh, sorry, it came second last out of its 26 entries. Oh, that's always the case, isn't it? It's all political. It's all nonsense. And those winners, those that actually last, are very few and far between. They're right. Oh, motorists are denied pothole payouts as councils wriggle out of 3 in 4 claims. Oh, surprise, surprise, surprise. Yes. The thing about councils is they treat that money as if it's their own. Actually, some ends up in their pocket as if it's their own too, but that's another story. Why on earth? But the thing is, councils do not, by very nature, have people with imagination. None. They are so imbued with the political ideal and the political mantra. They have no, oh, darling, don't please mention that. It is not the sort of thing that we do. Well, sometimes some of these things are the sort of things they should do. But anyway, wriggling out of pothole payments, not a bit surprised. I am not a bit surprised. Hey. Let's see, old drones and Gatwick again. The fly to Sydney in 2 hours via space. Well, that's interesting. Tourists could fly from London to Sydney in just 2 hours in the next decade via space. The Civil Aviation Authority is researching the medical impacts of suborbital space flights, in which travelers will be blasted into space to arrive at their destination in a fraction of the time taken by conventional flying. Normal flights to Sydney take 22 hours. Whee! Suborbital flights, such as those offered by Virgin Galactic, cost more than £350,000 now. Oh, I'll take 2. But could soon be accessible to anybody. Dr. Ryan Anderson, the CAA's medical lead for spaceflight, told the Times it was definitely not science fiction. He added that it would happen a lot sooner than people think, certainly in less than 10 years. Might not be fast enough for me, but still. Astronauts undergo years of training, while this will not be needed for tourists. But some medical problems could make the G-forces involved dangerous. Right. What else? Oh, there's that lovely story of the rugby marathon runner who carried his colleague over the line at the end of the marathon. And his colleague suffers from a motor neuron disease. So his friend, a rugby player, got him to the line and then carried him over. Lovely story, that. And a U-turn as nurses union demand double-digit pay rise. Well, that was one of the main headlines. Let's see. When I was an elite rower, I had to take a swab test because I was a woman. Now trans competitors risk pushing females out of the sport. Oh dear, this business of trans is, I'm afraid the modern generation do get themselves, they get their knickers into a twist over all sorts of things. And they talk themselves into it. An energy boss has got himself into trouble for using the wrong kind of bricks on a listed building. It's amazing. It's amazing what you learn from the inside. 56, we've only got 4 minutes left. Let's see. And is anything else of any interest? Well, there's tons of it. I just don't have time to get around to it. Oh, here's a lovely one. Prince Andrew fears his family could turn off the power and water in order to get him to move out of Royal Lodge. The Duke is reportedly refusing to leave the £30 million Windsor home he shares with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, putting him on a collision course with King Charles. Andrew, 63, is now said to be seeking face-to-face talks with his brother. A friend said the Duke of York was in low spirits and has become reclusive as the prospect of vacating his home of 20 years looms. Well, I had to vacate mine of 27 years, so I know exactly how he feels, and it's absolutely right. I have some sympathy with him on this. Never mind what the issues may or may not have been. And I think that if King Charles wants to show some humanity, he should show it to his brother and say, stay where you are, son, until such time as you feel that you want to move and not forced to move. Oh, this lovely one in the middle. Did aliens abduct a pilot flying over the North Sea? For decades, Captain Bill Schaffner's disappearance 12 minutes after takeoff from RAF Binbrook in 1970 was part of UFO lore. His plane was found on the seabed, its ejection seat in place, the cockpit canopy closed, but minus his body. Eee, that's a good read. That's a good read. And that's it for today, I think. 10:58, 2 minutes to go. What should we do? I haven't played this for a little while. Well done, the energy companies. They're full of bright ideas to help their customers. Now they've made power so expensive that for an average house such as this, you can't afford to heat it. So you don't need appliances such as this. But that means you also don't need a fridge, because you can keep your groceries cool and fresh without it. The house is cold enough. Well done, chaps. That's our little sting in the tail to have a go at the energy companies. Okay, I think that's enough from me. It is 10:59, so by the time we've actually played our little sting, it will be 11 o'clock, and we won't have cheated you out of a whole 60 seconds of our time. We'll be back tomorrow, and until tomorrow, this is Keith Hayes with Mirador Television, and saying toodle pip, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And you never know what happens in Mirador Television. We modelled it on an old BBC programme called Pebbleman at 1, in which people walked through the middle of the set because that was the only way that they could get to work. And here is not exactly the only way that you can get to the checkout or the reception in White Hart Hotel, but it is certainly where everybody can see us, and that people like John Henty this morning can pop in and simply say hello and have a chat. Till tomorrow, toodle pip.